Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 194.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers and enthusiasts who are looking to take their games to new heights. Dedicated to custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to sharing useful information on professional club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice techniques. Changing golfers' lives, one golfer at a time. This interview with putting guru and good friend David Orr has been a really fun learning experience for me. As you know, I started a series of episodes that I called the Unlearning episodes. Well, in this episode, David shared a much different take on learning. In the interview, he talks about the concepts of unlearning, learning, and relearning. What a great discussion for golfers and coaches with someone I view as an expert in learning and coaching, David Orr with Flat Stick Academy.
The Golf Improvement Podcast is sponsored by Tony Wright and Game Improvement Golf. Tony creates exceptional golf clubs. You shoot lower scores.
Hello, this is Tony Wright with episode 194 of the Golf Improvement Podcast. And, well, David, you don't realize this, I bet, but the first time we talked was 2015, and this is the 7th episode you've done with me. I'll bet you didn't go back and look for that, right? David Orr.
Super.
Wow.
So basically a year, huh?
Oh, my gosh, it's gone. Golf Magazine Top 100 teacher, creator of Flat Stick Academy in Southern Pines, North Carolina. And so it was fun to go back. And, you've done over 15 years of putting research. But we're going to talk about things that and probably some things you already talked of before, but maybe some other ones like, for example, the head. But you said on Flat Stick, as a matter of fact, there is so much conflicting information, it can get quite confusing for many of us. And that's what kills a lot of people. Thanks for being with me tonight. This is going to be fun.
Tony, thanks for having me again.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah.
So you made an interesting comment about things that we need to unlearn. And I would think it would be easier to learn something new than to unlearn something old. If that makes sense. Okay. So obviously there is a process of unlearning, learning, and then relearning, right?
Yeah.
So I think what happens with putting, there's an overflow like from full swing. So you know how in the full swing has some mantras like keep your head down, keep your left arm straight, shift your weight, turn and return, like these little mantras, right?
Yeah.
And I think that leaks over into putting. And so when golfers come to see me for instruction, they kind of just blast me with all these sayings. And what comes to my mind, and I listen, and what comes to my mind is how golfers just think that these sayings are actually relevant to them. Does that make sense?
When you get done telling me some of the things, I'll tell you another story related to that's so exactly related to this. It's just unbelievable. But go ahead.
Yeah, so typically, obviously, people are nervous when they come for a lesson, and they tend to get a little chatty. Some people don't. Some people are very quiet, but you get those people that just kind of blast you with, am I rocking my shoulders? Do I need to like maintain the triangle and rock the baby and make sure I keep the putter low and be a pendulum? Am I doing those things? It's like, yeah. Oh my gosh, wow, whoa, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what's interesting is I think putting instruction, and I think for years now, it's just been based off of trying to find some type of word cue or tip that works for the day, rather than actually learning the skills of putting, as we've talked about, learning the skills of read, right? Predicting the break direction and the break amount, right? Learning to do that. Learning the skills of speed, learning distance control from away from the hole, learning entry speed near the hole, learning to choose a good line and then start the ball in line. So, it's interesting. People, they don't think about the basic skills of putting like you would basketball. With basketball, it's what? Shooting, dribbling, passing, and rebounding, right?
Yeah.
So I think the average golfer needs to learn where they stand, what skill level they're at with their basic putting skills before worrying about rocking the baby, being a pendulum and keeping the putter low, which are kind of contradictory things anyway. So
yeah.
So, and then finding out in their stroke what's relevant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so getting back to unlearning, I think a student needs to be open to learning, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
This new knowledge, acquiring new knowledge or information and modifying the old knowledge. And one of the things that I think people think that when they learn something new that the old is gone, it's not. That old pattern's still there. Does that make sense?
If you could see me smiling as you say these words, it just can't. It's just so absolutely on. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're dealing with the brain and you're dealing with motor programs, or new ones and old ones. And I think when we get stressed, the old ones appear.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's why we have to practice and train and learn to master the new ones so that they can kind of suppress the old ones, if that makes sense. So I think it's easier to learn something new than it is to unlearn, so to speak. But there is a process of, again, unlearning, learning, and then relearning. The unlearning part is taking the information that you thought was relevant and replacing it with relevant information. And then learning, what's interesting, learning what sensations are, like what new sensations are that we feel or see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And learning to identify those so that when I hit a putt, I use feedback, like, okay, that felt like this. You know what I mean? It felt, or it looked like this, right? So using feedback, using recall, being able to recognize what a pull or a push would feel like, or a pure stroke would feel like. And then the uncanny thing that great players can do is they can actually recreate a very similar move. And we see this on Sam Putt Lab all the time, and it comes up in the consistency of the Sam Putt Lab numbers, that really elite players can recreate a very similar movement pattern versus the average golfer is not even aware of what they did, right? They weren't even, the ball went to the right. Well, why did it go to the right? You tell them the face is open. Well, I didn't feel that. Whereas somebody that's really, really aware and a really elite golfer, I think this is one of the things that separates the different skill levels, is your ability to recreate a desired movement pattern.
So let me tell you my story, okay? A little bit.
Yeah.
Great guy. This guy, and I'm going to even come clean. I mean, I've seen him a number of times, maybe even a year or so ago. Of course, maybe his movement patterns were different then. +1 handicap. Nice guy. And his feeling of what his putting stroke should be is like a full swing. Hands through the ball, right? Pulling left all the time. And we had a great session about a week ago and stuff, and trying to get him to have some of the feels like that. And so I emailed him tonight. I said, how's it going? He said, sometimes I really get it. Sometimes I'm hitting much. I love, what I'm doing, but I don't have it all the time yet. And I said to him, well, first of all, congratulations, because now you get it once in a while, right?
Yeah.
And I said, it's dirty, ugly, crappy work, to change something that you've done for, I mean, so many years, and it's more than the years I've seen him, it's hard. But the guy, when you were talking about the great players, they have put in the work so that when they perceive something that's different, they know it because they've hit so many putts and evaluated so many things. But so I told them, just kind of stay on this road, okay? And if you hit a putt that you think is not good, then sort of evaluate where that was, and just keep at it. You're on a great road to making changes. He's been frustrated for a long, long time with just can't make short putts, and it's not exactly the David Orr Scooby-Doo story, right? But but it's a little bit like it. And I told him, don't be afraid to practice the old and practice the new and compare them and do a lot of feels between the two of them.
Yeah.
Great
advice.
But it's a nice story to me for him because he's at least starting to feel, like he's getting out of this thing that's been driving him crazy for a long time.
Yeah, it is. Putting can definitely drive us pretty crazy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I think another thing is, golfers don't stay down the path long enough when they're learning something new. They'll try it for a hole or two or 9 holes, and then they totally abandon it and go back to their old, right? So it takes time. I think our friend Dennis Corley said it best, the slow burn.
Yeah.
It's like a slow, deliberate, awkward process at first. But once you start to acquire more understanding of what you're doing and what it feels like, and what's interesting, teaching back out on tour again, I've been around some good mental coaches, and we had a great discussion walking down the fairway at the PGA Championship. We were talking about feel is a memory of a past sensation, and a sensation is your perception of a present use of your sensory system. In other words, what your eyes see or what your hands feel, so to speak, right? It's our perception of that, right? So when we make a good stroke, we perceive it to be, my shoulders and arms and hands were perfectly in sync on that stroke, and the ball went where I wanted to go, as opposed to, I felt my right arm kind of roundhouse a little bit, and that was a pull, right? So that perception, right, of certain sensations, right? And then the feel is a memory of past sensations. So that's where I think really good players are really good at recreating that past sensation. Even though it might not be exactly identical, it's a pretty close clone, so to speak. That makes sense?
Well,
so you see a Tiger, but that's why you hear Tiger saying, I got to get my reps in. You know what I mean? So you got to get a high number of reps in so that you can literally store those sensations into feel, right?
And the sensations, the variations in sensations, isn't it? Because it's not like it's got to be exactly the same, or some other day there's a different sensation too, isn't there? Absolutely. So, it's learning to go through that process of learning what those sensations are, and then being able to draw them back up again. And but yeah, it was a great conversation we were having, and he said something about an image sensation. So he was talking about Jason Day, how Jason Day uses a lot of visual imagery, like seeing what the ball's going to do, and then seeing himself setting up to it, and seeing himself making a stroke. I'm like, wow, that's pretty strong in the visual imagery part of mental skills, right? So actually seeing yourself do it before you do it, I thought that was pretty interesting. And going back to the average golfer, a lot of average golfers just sit up there and they just hit the putt toward the hole hoping that it goes in without being aware of anything, if that makes sense. So they're either bogged down into two basic camps, either thinking about nothing and just hitting it and hoping, right? Or like we said about Chatty Cathy there earlier, they're thinking about too many things. Does that make sense? So you got those two opposites, right? And then it's like the tour players are very aware of their target, and they're very aware of what they're feeling, if that makes sense, a lot of them. So
But yeah, so this concept of unlearning, learning, and relearning. Let's talk about. Let's just take the example of the saying, "Take it back short, accelerate, and follow through." Right?
Yeah.
Let's divide those into let's unlearn, and then learn, and then relearn. Okay.
Okay.
So, to me, take it back short and follow through short would make sense on a 3-foot putt. Does it make sense?
Absolutely.
Take it back long and follow through long would make sense on a 60-foot putt. Right? So putting it in proper context, right? So taking it back short's okay on a short putt, but make sure you follow through short as well, right?
Yeah.
Let's kind of unlearn acceleration. If you thought of acceleration as having a direction and a magnitude, right?
Right.
A lot of people don't realize that we have to accelerate the putter away from the ball in the backswing. They only think of acceleration as
forward, right?
Forward, right?
Yeah.
So if we learn that, there's acceleration away from the ball, then there's a change of direction, which changes the direction of the acceleration. And then there is a positive acceleration toward impact, right? And then after impact, there's a negative acceleration. So I like to think of acceleration as being positive or being negative, as opposed to using the words acceleration and deceleration. That makes sense?
So it's giving them a little bit different concept of what's going on.
Absolutely. And a direction, right?
Yeah.
So it's away from the ball, toward the ball, and then believe it or not, the follow through, it's back away. It's back the other direction again. So,
right.
But yeah, so what's interesting is a lot of people don't realize that when you reach peak velocity at impact, acceleration is 0. So they just struggle with the concept of velocity and acceleration because we're all used to driving cars, right? We're used to going which direction?
Forward. Yeah. Right.
They don't
think about going backwards.
Well, they don't think about it that when they start to hit the brakes or stop accelerating, correct? You no longer have your foot on the gas pedal, that the vector switches directions. So
right.
Anyway, but acceleration, right? And then follow through. Let's talk about that. So follow through is a slowing down phase, not a speeding up phase. And I see so many people, because they're trying to accelerate through the ball, that they end up with these exaggerated follow-throughs. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're Catholic, correct?
Yes.
It's like a mortal sin if you don't follow through. Right?
Yeah.
So you see these really ridiculously looking putting strokes a lot on the practice green, just because people are using these mantras, so to speak. And it's okay. They just don't know any better, right? Because they just haven't learned what to actually do and what actually applies to them. I had a guy the other day that was taking it back on a 10-foot putt. He was only taking it back 472 milliseconds, which is, average 670 milliseconds on a 10-footer, right?
Right.
And I was like explaining to him that he needed to make a longer stroke in the backswing, not just in length, but also in time. And he looked at me like, what? I said, you need more time in the backswing so that you can generate force. And we went over and worked on it, and he's like, oh my gosh, well, I don't have to feel like I got to hit it as hard. I'm like, exactly. So we talked about the length of the stroke being one thing, but the time being another thing, and then the amount of force applied over that distance and time. And then that started to really hit home. Yeah. So he had to relearn the relationship of length, time, and force. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I had a guy today, a guy that follows my blogs and podcasts, and he said, should I feel like I just let the putter go at the start of my forward stroke, at the end of his backstroke?
Right.
And I thought, where did he hear that one? And this is a great guy, so when he listens to this, I know he'll chuckle, right? I mean, you have to apply a force to get it started. You have to apply a force to get it moving forward.
Yeah, just to change the direction of it, exactly.
Right,
So,
right. Just very simple.
yeah, but if somebody has a long, slow stroke like a Crenshaw or Lauren Roberts, it can feel more like a wrecking ball, I guess, in the downswing, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you take somebody like a Snedeker who's generates a lot of force in a short period of time, right? More of a pop stroke. He's not going to feel like he's letting it go.
Yeah.
He's going to feel like he's driving it or tapping that nail, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it really depends on your stroke style. And I've been saying this for a long time. All these timing numbers and stuff are dependent on the prime mover, how you generate speed, as you well know, right? Are you generating speed with your wrists? Are you generating speed with your arms? Are you generating speed with your shoulders? Are you generating speed with a coordinated movement of all of that? That's what determines these tempo and timing numbers, not trying to be a certain number, so to speak. So the reason why the guy didn't have enough time in the backswing was he was basically just using his hands and arms to propel the putter. And as soon as I added some shoulder motion to the backswing, it created more time.
Yeah. And that's a lot of times is what you see too for that real short one, that all hands because nothing else can make it go.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's some people that come to me and I'm like, they're so wristy that they're better off crouched over old school style, right?
Yeah.
And let them pop it with the wrist. Just don't move the shoulders too much until you get longer, further away. So I do teach all kinds of different putting styles depending on the player, and so all those numbers are different. But it's been fun. I just think that the average golfer, when I look at them, versus tour players, is obviously tour players are putting on the better surfaces, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're also, putting 4 or 5 days a week. You know what I mean? They're putting a little bit before round, a little bit after round. And I can remember when I came up with the plastic practice plan, I just used tour player model, and I give it to my competitive junior golfers, and they look at me and they go, "You want us to practice this much?"
That's what they do, right?
I mean, everything I teach you is everything that a tour player does.
Yeah.
These people look at me like I'm, got 3 eyeballs or something. It's like, yeah, this is what they do. Not every one of them, but this is what most of them do.
Yeah.
They putt before round, they putt after round. They're playing 4 or 5 days a week. They're practicing their putting 4 or 5 days a week. They're putting on great surfaces.
And they're adapting because every surface is going to be a little different. If they don't take the time to adapt, how are they going to control speed, and how are they going to control entry speed or distance and speed?
Well, this will make the average golfer feel a little better. So I was over in England for a couple weeks working with one of my players, and we went out to watch him play one of the golf courses. He's a member at 3 of the best courses in all of England. We played all 3 of them. And he played all 3 of them. I walked 18 holes with him. And what's interesting is the better the greens, he putted well. Well, he went and played this other famous golf course, Sunningdale. I think everybody's heard of that. And the golf course was magnificent, but the greens were slow, and he made nothing. So if tour players struggle with a change in green speed, rolling from a 12 to an 8.5, with a little bit of bumpy surfaces, I can imagine amateurs are going to struggle. So that's the one thing that I want our listeners to understand is it makes pretty much good sense. If you have quality surfaces, you're probably going to make more putts than when you don't have as good a surface. I mean, that's just basic common sense, but nobody ever looks at it that way, do they?
No. Well, the junior college kids that I help, I mean, they don't end up on the best courses all the time, right? And boy, are they struggling with exactly that thing because, the stimp is going to be 8 or 9 or something, not like it is in the course that they practice on at home.
So people's expectations are not aligned with the reality of the golf course they're playing. Number 2, hole location changes, right? You get that tournament where, maybe on a Thursday or a Friday, the hole locations are a little bit simpler. They're on maybe 1.5 to 2.5% slope. And then you get those days where it's a little more tough day, and they're on a 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, right? Try not to see too many on a 4, I don't think. But
no, that's right.
You get the idea. I mean, people don't realize that hole location has a huge influence on whether you're making putts. Slope percentage, angle that you're putting from, distance that you're putting from, right? So, yeah, I mean, getting back to the amateur golfer, they're worried too much about keeping the putter low and not working on their skill set.
Yeah.
And I tell people you don't have the skill set unless it travels. So if it can get on that airplane and go across seas and it comes with you, then you have the skill.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. So Phil Kenyon and I had a good giggle the other day. He goes, "Don't you notice that you read putts better for other people than yourself?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." I said, "I watch 500 to 600 balls roll a day, 4 or 5 days a week, just like you." I said, "We get pretty good at green reading, but if we're out there on the golf course by ourselves, we sit there and start second guessing our reads, right?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think golfers need to stop worrying about the lines on the ball and how many practice strokes should I take, and should I look at the hole, or all this stuff, right? Keep the putter low, be a pendulum, which is a contradiction, right? Because last thing I checked is a pendulum only has a low point, correct?
Right.
Well, why if you're keeping it low, then you're changing the radius, correct?
Yeah.
Lengthening it and shortening it and lengthening it. Yeah. So, yeah, there's just so much contradictory words out there in putting, and I tried to make a change. With the Flat Stick Academy and those certifications, that to change the way putting was coached. And I think I've had a little bit of an impact, but not as big an impact as I would have thought.
Well, maybe just like everything else. Remember, it takes time. If the people that are, for example, right? I mean, the videos that you did, right? I mean, that was a master class. In the 12 videos that you did,
the Flat Stick Staff Training Network,
right. But guess what? If you watch it once, you won't get it. Very few people, if they may be really good. I know I won't get it if I watch those ones. I told you when I was stranded. Did I tell you about being stranded?
Yeah,
why
exactly.
Because of my truck stuff. So I watched 5 of them again. And I saw stuff that I didn't. You got to work.
Yeah, well, you got to just, it gets to, there's nuggets. Pretty much, I try to make sure that when I say something, there's gold in it.
Yeah.
Makes sense? And a lot of times people don't see it. They don't see it or they don't hear it. So I try not to make a habit of just saying stuff for the sake of saying stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those 12 2-hour sessions, that was a lot of work, and the people that participated were great. And we'll have those available when my website gets renovated here. We're undergoing a complete new upgrade to the website, and hopefully in the future we'll have that available, obviously. And I'm changing the format a little bit I want you to just visualize being able to buy a collection of things. So in other words, like the stroke fundamentals, right? There's basically, remember the snowflakes that we had, the 6 different pods? Yeah, so each pod would have a collection of 6 short videos pertaining just to that. So you can buy the collection, that particular collection or another collection. So that's kind of how I'm going to redo it, if that makes sense. Because I felt that the website that we had, the subscription website, was great for coaches, but it wasn't very useful for the average golfer. So making shorter, more clear, more concise type video collections would be probably the way to go.
Yeah. Well, before we end, though, one more little thing that I keep seeing propping up, and I wouldn't have caught it if you hadn't talked about it, and that is this crazy little thing about telling golfers to keep their head down when they putt.
Yeah.
I mean, and I can't say who it was. I wouldn't dare say who it was. I mean, on one of the social media things, but somebody that, has got a lot of people following him right now. telling people to do that, right? And I thought, I guess at one level, everybody thinks you should do that, but it's just not a coordinated way to make a stroke.
Yeah. So there's a difference between looking a little early, which is anticipatory anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. So I've caught myself doing that a few times where I kind of anticipate and I kind of look, my eyes shift from the ball to out in front of the ball a little bit. And that's rooted in anxiety. You see what I'm saying? So that's the real cause of it right now. Keeping your head down and listening for it to drop, and then all of a sudden you don't hear anything for the next couple minutes. Number one, you're not getting any feedback of whether you started online. You're not getting any feedback from the ball roll at all. So actually, a good friend of mine, Brad Faxon, asked me my thoughts on it. He goes, I like to hit the putt, then look up and pick it up, just maybe a third of the way out there or whatever he told me, but so you can watch the ball roll out. So I think you can look once the ball struck, go ahead and look, right? Turn your head and look. Swivel your head and look. Now, what's interesting about the head, we collected, the 3D data with Doc Neal, myself, Phil Kenyon, where we measured people with sensors on the body. Everybody's head moves pretty much. The bad kids tend to move the head moves forward because the head and the shoulders are, and maybe even the hips, are working in the horizontal plane too much. They're turning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They're turning together, right? Whereas the good kids, their head actually might even tilt a little backwards, but one distinguishing difference is their rotational separation between the head and the shoulders. They're not moving together like Frankenstein.
Yeah.
They're rotating. The shoulder girdle is moving and gliding underneath the head, and the head might even experience a counter rotation, moving backwards, and maybe even tilting more in the lateral plane. So one of my little sayings is, bad kids move their head forward, good kids move their head back. Tilt their head back, you know what I mean? So it's not like you're trying to move the head back. The head's being moved, so
it's kind of a reaction, or it's just a part of everything working together.
Yeah, well, not together, but rotationally separate.
Rotate. Okay, right. Yeah.
That's the key thing. So you need to be able to separate the rotation of the shoulders, the torso, from the pelvis. You need to be able to separate the rotation of the shoulders and the torso from the head. And then we have, two shoulder blades, two shoulder girdles, two clavicles, right? Two upper arms. So they're separate. They're separated. So they need to learn to work kind of in sync with each other, so to speak. That makes sense?
Yeah.
In sync. So you've got these little rotational separations going on, and then the biggest thing is the tilt. Is what happens is as you're turning through the ball, you start tilting in the lateral plane, and that's why the head moves backwards. So the rotational separation combining with a slight tilting is why the head moves backwards. A lack of rotational separation and no tilting is why while you're turning in forward flexion causes the head to move forward. So I just told you why it moves forward and why it moves back. So how do you keep it still? You have to be able to get the right amount of rotational separation and tilting to keep the eyes fairly quiet. And I think the eyes are what's quiet. The eyes stay relatively gazing on the golf ball, unless you're peaking a little early. So I think keeping the head down, I see people's heads actually go down when a lot of good players, especially people that are brushstrokers, like anybody that's got that shaft, forward leaning toward that lead side, you'll see the head move up and back a little bit. They have to because the radius is longer. So I don't see people keeping their head perfectly still. So keeping the head down to me is one of those mantras again.
Yeah.
So whoever said this on social media needs to unlearn, learn, and relearn.
Well, there you go. That's an ending piece, isn't it?
Well, we don't have to end it, but that would be
that would be a good place. Yeah.
That would be a good example of on social media, which is not the best place for you learn, because you don't know what's relevant to you, right? So
Yeah.
But yeah, the average golfer, putting a lot of times is an afterthought, because let's be honest, hitting a driver and hitting it far is the sexy part of the game, right? And
well, and you can be off with your driver 10 or 20 yards, you know, I mean, your famous story, right? Or you can be off with a 6-iron, you know, 5 or 10 yards, and you don't get all upset. But if you miss a 3-foot putt by an inch, there you go.
That was a true story. Most stories are lies. That one happens to be true. That was Sean Foley at the 2013 PGA Championship, walking down the fairway, saying, D, Rosie missed the fairway, no big deal. Rosie misses a green, no big deal. Now he misses a 4-footer, that's a big deal. That's your job, not mine. So, yeah, and there's a lot of truth to that. So, but yeah, getting back to, let's talk just before we end this. Let's talk a couple things that could help the average golfer. They do listen to your podcast.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Go to the lesson tee with an attitude of an open mind. That you're willing to learn something new, that you're willing to try a new movement pattern, to make the effort to forget your usual way of doing it and try something new. Maybe you can learn a new way, and might even be a better way, if that makes sense. Now, people that say, well, my old way works, well, then don't take a lesson. But I have yet to see somebody come to my putting green that is so good a putter that they don't need help with something.
Yeah.
Whether it's green reading, speed control, hitting their lines, something in their technique, something in their process. That's something that's a little different that I've really emphasized in the last 2 years, is the average golfer doesn't have a process. They have a routine, but they don't have a process. To me, they're different. Routine is the order in which you do things, right?
Yeah.
Do I aim the ball, then take a couple practice strokes and set up to it, look twice, and then go, right? That would be an example of a routine. Process to me would be, okay, am I aware of the distance? Am I aware that I'm hitting it uphill? Am I aware that it's breaking right to left? It's breaking about 2 feet. I'm going to aim. Where do I intend to aim? Boom. Then I line up the line on the ball, right?
Yeah.
Then in preparation, while I'm taking my practice strokes, I'm trying to feel. Remember, feel is the memory of a past sensation. I'm trying to find that sensation that I want to produce. That makes sense? With my practice strokes. That's why we take a practice stroke. We don't do it just to loosen up.
or to be part of a routine. There's a reason we do it.
There's a reason for it. I'm trying to find the sensation that I've had in the past to hit this particular putt, right? Yeah. Then set up to the ball, and I might keep my feet pitter-pattering. I might keep my fingers moving. I might tap the putter. I might look back and forth. But that last look, I know where the hole is. I can see it. I can feel it. I can sense it, like a no-look pass in basketball. Once that last look, I've got it in my mind, and I'm putting to that picture and that sensation in my mind where the hole is. And then I'm aware of whether the stroke is in sync or not. That makes sense? And then when I look up, I know whether I executed or not. And then I immediately look for feedback. And I try to recognize or recall, whether I pushed it or pulled it or hit it too hard or too soft, misread it, mishit it, or it was just pure, right? And if it's pure, then I add a little emotional attachment to it, if that makes sense. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like yes, right.
Like an inner fist pump that nobody can see, right?
Yeah.
But I try to I've really, really worked hard on my emotional regulation when it comes to putting. A lot of people don't realize this, that when I played mini tour golf, my putting and chipping were the worst parts of my game. My best part of my golf game was driving the golf ball, above average length, and pretty much you could just put it down the fairway, whether it was with a driver, 3-wood, or 1-iron. We had 1-irons back then.
Yeah.
And balls that spun, the Titleist 384 Tour, remember that?
Yeah.
So, balls that spun and curved. But yeah, I mean, a great driver of the golf ball and not a good short game. And what's funny is I look back now, if I were to take inventory now, I had a good stroke. I changed putters all the time, changed grips all the time because I just didn't know any better. And obviously that's what kind of got me into doing putting research, first putters with David Adell, and then obviously putting strokes. And then I realized nobody stroked it exactly the same. And then we measured the body. And what's interesting is if I look back, or I take inventory of my game, I grew up on small, flat greens. So anytime I got on big greens with lots of shape, I didn't know how to. So my green reading skill was horrible. And I didn't grow up on fast greens. So my speed control was not good. So those two skills right off the bat were lacking. And then if I really was honest with myself and took inventory, a lot of my friends know this, but you know this as well, that I've battled bipolar disorder my whole career. And being able to control one's emotion is even more difficult with somebody that's bipolar. So emotional regulation was the thing that really prevented me from getting to the next level. And it's hard to admit that. It's hard to admit that, oh man, that's the mental skill that I really just never really mastered or conquered.
But you didn't realize that either.
I didn't realize. No. I mean, I knew how to focus. I knew how to concentrate. I knew how to visualize and do this imagery, and I didn't realize the importance of emotional regulation, number one, and I didn't realize the importance of my narrative. I was the one that would walk in and say, yeah, I hit 17 greens today and had 39 putts like it was a trophy. It was like a way of saving face. Oh, I had 39 putts today. I had 6 3-putts today. It's like a badge of honor. You know what I mean? And so I didn't realize that the narrative that I was creating was a problem, and I didn't realize that the emotional regulation, I was already, a fist tied behind my back, so to speak, in that fight. So, I think it's pretty cool though that now, even though I'm 53, going to be 54, I at least finally realized it. You know what I mean? Like that's really what the difference was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then some guys that are so talented physically that they can overcome some of this emotional regulation, but you can see it even in the PGA Championship. The kid Mito.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
I hope he comes back. Really strong, right?
Yeah.
So he was feeling it, right? So, but I like to see that kid come back and win something big to make things even, so to speak. But JT was tough, wasn't he?
Oh yeah. Did you see him look one putt into the hole too?
Oh,
there was one that he hit, and the announcers even said it. He said, "Boy, he was like following that thing right into a hole, and it happened."
Well, when he hits it and you see him stride with that left foot to reach, he knew it. He knows it's in before it is, and that's another thing that reminds me of Suzanne Pedersen when I was working with her at the Solheim Cup. The big putt she made it. She knew she made it as soon as she hit it. And I think a lot of players, when you're in the right place mentally, when you've executed, right?
Yeah.
And Suzanne dropped the putter a foot before the ball even went in the hole, but she knew she'd executed. So that's one thing I want to leave our listeners with is pay more attention to your process. Pay more attention to what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. And stay more focused on execution rather than the result. I know we hear that all the time, but that's truly the difference. That's truly one of the major differences is tour players, the elite golfers, elite putters, they're way more process-oriented, process-driven than they are results. They get results because their process is pretty bulletproof. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Jackson tells me all the time that his mental skills are what made him great.
And you also said taking inventory. I have, you see so many people. It just, sort of on my level, 6-8 handicap, right? That they just putt and that's it. They don't care. In a way, they don't care. Well, I had a bad day, or I don't know what's the right way of saying this, David. That
ignorance is bliss.
They just don't have any desire to change.
Yeah, well, ignorance is bliss, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I know one guy that I watch him and his follow through is like a half inch less than a half inch off the ground, a foot past the putt, and has no idea.
No, but yeah. So I mean, we're all a little different, right? We're all wired a little different, and some people just want a little something to ease the pain, right? A little morphine.
Yeah.
Right. So a little tip here, a little tip there, while other people are trying to conquer or master. You know what I mean? And
conquer's fun.
Yeah, the mastery mindset, those people do really well.
Yeah.
People with a fixed mindset don't do well. I think that's what we're basically really discussing, is what type of mindset you really have towards the game. You know what I mean? But golf is amazing. It's an amazing sport, and it's pretty interesting to experience teaching golf at all levels, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Taking a beginning golfer, and you see my before and afters on Facebook. Some of these people have, that's their first lesson that they've ever had.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's good. So anyway, all right. So anything you want to summarize or recap?
No. Take inventory. If you really mean it, if you really care, take inventory. And it's also whether you're an instructor too, right?
Yeah.
Take inventory of what you're doing. See if you find ways to be better. Take inventory if you play. Feedback and recall. Who does feedback and recall? Almost nobody, other than saying, "Oh, I missed it." Wow, what an opportunity to get something out of it. If most people would just do that,
feedback,
they'd be way ahead.
Recognition and being able to recreate it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. The hard part is being able to recreate it, because I think I disagree with the dude that says that the talent code dude.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things on talent is the ability to recreate. You sit there and you look at somebody that can shoot free throws, like shoot 80-something% from the free throw line or 90% they know how to recreate the motion.
Yeah.
Without hijacking it. You know what I mean? That's the thing, is we hijack all the time. We hijack ourselves mid-stroke. Do you know what I mean? We get distracted. Instead of just going through the process, trusting the process, and executing the process, we can hijack the stroke right in the middle of the stroke. I mean, how many times does that happen to us? All the time.
Sure.
And I think that's why the guy says keep your head down, so that you won't hijack the stroke. Peaking early is hijacking, right? So, but taking inventory is a good thing to take away from this. It's easier to learn something new than to unlearn something. Sometimes just unlearning is just changing somebody's knowledge or information concepts, right? We talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
And to wrap this up, the 7 principles of putting performance on Flat Stick Academy is a way for you to take inventory, right? Take inventory of your mental skills, take inventory of your putting skills, take inventory of your putter, right? Take inventory of how you generate speed, taking an inventory of how do you manage direction? Do you push it? Do you pull it? And then what strategies are you using? So that's a good little thing to end on, is we take inventory of our putting and our game.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Well, you are ultimately, you love teaching. You love maybe creating, or I don't even know if that's the right word.
Yeah, it is.
You love creating thoughts in people and helping them to understand the things that you spent a lot of time learning.
Correct.
Right? And that's what kind of juices you a lot. So it's great.
I love it when people figure things out. I'm a problem solver. I like helping people figure out what's going on. You know what I mean? And what's funny is they don't ever want to admit the mental skills are off. You always get the Heisman Trophy on that one, Tony.
Yeah.
But a lot of times that's what it is, and that was a big thing for me to admit. You know what I mean? So, where the real gremlins were, the real demons were, like, okay, I struggle with emotional regulation. Being able to stay calm. And we see it all the time. I mean, look at Justin Thomas, man. Wow. Whoa. He stepped it up a notch mentally, did he not?
Oh, yeah. It was neat. It was fun to watch.
Great golf course. All right, Tony, thank you so much, and I look forward to us. Maybe we're going to have the Flat Stick Conference, I think, in November this year instead of December.
Okay.
I'm going to try to do it before Thanksgiving, if I can.
Well, you better do that because I have to go to Rochester with my wife. I don't get out of that one, so...
Yeah, you guys going up there for the holiday, are you?
We always go up there, and we see, let's see, do you know Bob Sims? Do you know Bob Sims?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, he and I have a donut and coffee together every year up there and talk coaching and putting and golf and all kind of stuff. So we have a great time. So, but it's also my family too. So
you going up for Thanksgiving or Christmas?
Yeah, Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so I'll try to do this thing early November if I can. So we're gonna have a Flat Stick Conference in a level 1 and a level 2 probably. Like it'll be like a week's worth of good stuff. So, all right, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye bye.
All right, bye bye.
Tony Wright and Game Improvement Golf, changing golfers' lives, one golfer at a time.
Thanks, David. I sincerely hope those of you listening to this one commit to listening to it at least twice and maybe more, and take inventory. What a great way to sum it up. I put a link in the show notes to the Flat Stick Academy website. You can find a link to a Flat Stick certified instructor near you on the site. And subscribing to the website content that David has made available is an amazing bargain at $99 a year. Finally, as David noted in the interview, the site is in the process of being updated to make the content even more useful to golfers and putting instructors. My shout out today is to Scott Sikorsky, who is an Aimpoint Express certified instructor in Crossville, Tennessee. One of my putting students wanted to take the Aimpoint Express Level 1 and 2 class. Good for him. And Scott invited me to attend also. It reinforced again for me that if golfers are serious about improving their green reading skills, they need to take this class. I put a link to Scott's Make Golfers Better website in the show notes. A reminder that there's a Support Game Improvement Golf link in the show notes for this podcast. And if you can provide some support, that will be greatly appreciated. Contributions are continuing to help me move toward my $4,000 goal for upgrading my website and podcasting computer. Thanks. Well, today is Thursday before I post this interview, and early this morning I tested positive for COVID. I'm doing okay, but please pray for me and also my wife, Diane. Guess what? COVID's not over. Depending on how I feel, I may not do a new blog post next Friday. We'll just see what happens. Well, that's it for today. In 2 weeks, episode 195 is well into the planning stages. Until then, take care, God bless Ukraine, and God bless America.
Game Improvement Golf, your source of information and inspiration to become an exceptional golfer now. www.gameimprovementgolf.com